Pants are one of the most important parts of your outfit. They last forever, super diverse, and in this video, I'll show you how to make them. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chad, I'm your Tall Tailor, and whether they're baggy, flared, skinny, there's so much you can do with a great pair of pants. In an attempt to keep this video as concise as possible, I'll be showing you how to make a standard straight leg pair out of a non-stretch material. However, you can use this process for any style you want. This video will be broken down into sections and I'll have the entire thing time-stamped in the description so you guys can go back to them. But before we start actually sewing, we have to go through some terms. In its most basic form, pants can be broken down into 4 different parts: the front, right, and left panel, and the back, right, and left panel. There are obviously other pieces you can add to this, but these are the main 4. Taking a look at one of these panels, you can see that it's a 5-sided shape made up of the waist, the outseam, the hem, the inseam, and the rise. The back 2 panels are cut pretty much the same, except they're just a little bit bigger. So each of these panels are identical, but tweaking them in different ways is what leads to different shapes and different styles of pants. And almost every pair of pants that you own that's in your closet right now will be made of a variation of these 4 panels. To better visualize this shape, it helps to get a pair of pants, fold it down the middle, and lay it nice and flat so this 5-sided shape can be easier to see. Here on this pair of Levi's, you can easily see the waist, outseam, hem, inseam, and the rise. All right, so now we have our basic pant shape in mind. Let's take a closer look at these measurements. For the sake of simplicity, we're only going to be taking seven essential measurements. And of course, you can take a whole bunch more measurements if you want your pants to be a little bit more tailored, and that's definitely something we can do and explore in the future. But for now, we're going to distill it down to 7 measurements. So grab your tape measure and let's get started. Oh, and these measurements will be in inches. Alright, so I'm Canadian and we use metric here, but whenever it comes to like fashion and sewing, I've always used imperial measurements. We're making pants from scratch here, so the measurements that you use, centimeters or inches, doesn't really matter as long as you keep it the same throughout the entire project and you'll be fine. Now, you can either get these measurements off a pair of pants that fits you pretty well, or you can take them the OG way right off your body. Personally, I recommend a little bit of both, so grab some measurements off a pair of pants that fit you decently well and some off your body. Now, the first measurement we'll be taking is the waist. This is pretty straightforward. Most people know their waist measurement off the top of their head. If you're getting it from a pair of pants, you can just measure the circumference of the waist of your pants. When taking it on body, again, the same thing, just grab your tape measure and measure around your waist. Just make sure to get a couple of deep breaths in first so that you're nice and relaxed. Put your tape measure around your waist. Make sure you have about 2 fingers worth of space in between your body and the tape measure just to give you a little bit more room. Write that number down and you're done. Next up is the rise. So we're going to be taking 2 measurements here, our front rise and our back rise. When measuring on a pair of pants, grab your tape measure and measure from the crotch of the pants to the bottom of the waistband, from the front, and the crotch to the bottom of the waistband from the back of the pants. Now take note of the specific curve of the rise as this will become important later. In the meantime, just keep it in the back of your mind. Now some of you guys might be thinking, why do you need 2 measurements here, the front and the back? Basically, the front and the back side of your body are 2 different shapes, so we got to take that into consideration when making the pants. Therefore, we need 2 different measurements. Next up, we have the inseam. This is another common measurement that most people know off the top of their head. It's just from the crotch of the pants to the hem of your pants. When measuring it on a pair of pants that you already have, again, put the tape measure on the crotch and then all the way to the hem of the pants. So when you're doing it on body, again, you can just put the tape measure from the top of your crotch and all the way to the floor. Only 3 more measurements to go, and next up we have the leg opening or the hem circumference of the pants. On the pants, again, it's pretty simple. All you need to do is measure the circumference of the leg opening. For on body, you can make this measurement as large as you want, but you don't want to make it any smaller than the circumference of your heel to the arch of your foot. This way you can still put your pants on without adding any like zippers or stretch material to the hem of your pants. To find this measurement, all you'll need to do is point your foot, kind of like your ballerina, and take your tape measure, wrap it around your heel to the top of your foot with a little bit of space so that it's a little bit comfortable. And this will be the minimum distance that you can make the circumference of the leg opening so that you will be able to slip your foot in. All right, number 5 is the outseam. Again, this one's a pretty simple measurement. You're going to be measuring from the bottom of the waistband on your pants all the way to the hem of the pants, and on body, you can just put it from your waist all the way to the floor. Number 6, all right, our thigh measurement is next. This is a pretty important measurement for your pants because if you choose a too small measurement, it's going to be very tight. Too big isn't too much of an issue, but too small is going to be really uncomfortable. To get the thigh measurement on your pants, what you're going to do is put your tape measure around the widest part of the pants, widest part of the thigh. This is usually just below the crotch seam. That's where the widest part of your thigh is. Taking the measurement on body, you're going to put the tape measure around the widest part of your thigh, and once you find where that measurement is, you're going to grab the tape measure and slowly sit down. When you sit down, your leg is going to spread out a little bit and the measurement will increase by about, well, it does depend, but it's about like an inch and change. And that'll be your measurement. Number 7, lastly, we have our hip measurement. On your pants, this will be the measurement that's midway between the rise of your pants or the widest part of your jeans. On body, we're gonna grab our tape measure and wrap it around our hips, making sure to go over the widest part of our butt. As we did with our thigh measurement, when we have our tape measure nice and comfortable around our hips, we're going to hold on to it and take a seat. And as you can see, when you take a seat, the measurement does become a bit bigger by, again, like an inch and change. And with this larger measurement, that's the measurement we're gonna use for our hips. One last thing I do want to bring up is concerning the curve of the rise. This is also very important. On our diagram for the rise, you can see that it's a curve. However, it doesn't specify the exact shape of the curve. And this is going to be very important for the style and the shape of the pants, but more importantly, how the pants fit and how comfortable it's going to be. For an example, I have 3 different pairs of pants here, and I'm going to show you exactly how the rise differs between the pairs. The first is a pair of my Levi's 550s, and this one has more of a looser fit and a lower curve. Secondly, we have a pair of these Aeropostale jeans. This one fits a little bit more snug and has a tighter curve to the rise. Lastly, we have a pair of these Fjallraven Vita Pro cargos, and these ones have more of a curved shape to the rise and also fit a little bit snug. Now you can really see the difference when I trace these curves out and lay them one on top of each other. All 3 of these pants have rise lengths that are very similar. They're only about an inch off of each other, but as you can see, the curve is completely different depending on the brand of pants. So rise with too sharp of a curve, but otherwise an appropriate length might fit a little bit too snug. And on the other hand, if you have a rise that's just a little bit too long and too shallow of a curve, you can get bunching and a baggy look and look weird when you sit down. Now, finding the appropriate curve is something that honestly just takes a bit of trial and error and looking at different styles of pants and seeing what fits you well. I know that's not what you want to hear from a tutorial video, but that's honestly like the best way that I can explain it. A way that you can kind of get around that is finding a pair of pants that fits you reasonably well around the crotch area and just replicating the length and the curve of that rise. And that is it for the measurements. All right, so now that we have the measurements, let's get to transferring these to pieces that we can cut out and actually start sewing. To help us visualize this again, let's draw out the general shape of our pants and add the measurements onto it. Now this next step does require a teeny tiny bit of math, but I promise you it's not a lot. First thing we do is draw our basic template for the pants. We'll be doing one for the front, left and right, and one for the back, left and right. So here we have our basic template. It's nice and drawn out, and now we're going to add the measurements. We're going to be starting from the waist and working clockwise. So waist, outseam, hem, you get the picture, clockwise. The first measurement we have is our waist, and it's 32 inches. So we have 4 panels and 32 inches. However, we can't just divide this measurement in 4 and be on our way. Now, generally, when it comes to the 2 pants panels, the back ones are usually larger than the front ones. And in this case, we have a 32-inch waist. So we're going to be making the back 2 1 inch larger than the front. So our new measurements now are 7 inches for the front and 9 inches for the back. So again, I hope this didn't lose anybody. Our total waist is 32 inches, 2 front panels, 7 inches each, 2 back panels, 9 inches each. 7 times 2 is 14, 9 times 2 is 18, 18, 14, 32 inches. Great, okay, hope I didn't lose anybody. Next up, we have our outseam. This one, we don't have to do too much tweaking to it because the outseam is going to be the same on the front and the back, so we'll just add our measurement on. All right, next up, we have our hem or our leg opening, and again, this one will be 1 inch larger in the back than it is in the front. With our hem done, we have our inseam. Now, our inseam and our outseam, again, are going to be pretty similar in terms of length, so we're going to make the inseam front and back the same length for both. Next up, we have the rise, and just remember that the front rise and the back rise are different lengths. After that, there's not too much modification we can do, so we can just add it to our diagram. Next up, we have our hip and our thigh measurements. This will be the same thing that we did for the waist and the leg opening or the hem, and we'll make these 2 measurements 1 inch larger. So just a small recap for the vertical measurements, the inseam and the outseam, I kept both of those the same for the front and the back. However, the horizontal measurements, the leg opening, the thigh, the hips, and the waist, I made those 1 inch larger in the back than I did in the front. All right, so we're almost done with the measurements. The last thing we have to do is add our seam allowance. For those of you who don't know, seam allowance is the distance between the stitch that we make and the edge of the fabric. This is a very important measurement because if it's too small, we can risk pulling and fraying of the fabric. However, if it's too large, you can make the garment unnecessarily bulky and heavy, and it can feel uncomfortable on the inside of the clothes. Some common seam allowance measurements are 3/8 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch, and 4/8 or 1/2 of an inch. Now for most pants, and also depending on the style, you'll have different seam allowances at different areas of the pants, but for sake of simplicity, we're going to be adding 4/8. We're going to be adding 1/2 an inch seam allowance for the entirety of the pants except for the hem. So the reason why I chose 1/2 an inch seam allowance versus like a 3/8 or 5/8 of an inch is for two reasons. Firstly, because it does give, in most cases, an appropriate amount of seam allowance, so it's not too bulky or too small. And also because in most cases for the measurement, you're going to be adding seam allowance to the left and the right side, and 1/2 an inch times 2 is 1 inch, and it's a lot easier to do the math in your head to add 1 inch to a length. All right, so let's add the seam allowance to our diagram, and let's start with the waist. So for the waist, we'll be adding 1/2 an inch to both sides of our measurement, so that'll be increased by 1 inch. For our next measurement, our out seam, we'll be adding 1/2 an inch to the top, and we'll be adding 1.5 inches to the bottom. The reason why we're adding 1.5 inches to the bottom is because we're going to be adding a hem. 1.5 is a little bit too big for a hem at the bottom of the pants, but it gives us a little bit more wiggle room for the length of the pants. Next up, we have the leg opening, and again, we're going to be adding 1/2 an inch to the left and the right, so that'll be 1 inch in total. So just add that to the front and the back part of our panels. Next up is our inseam, and we're going to be doing the same thing to our inseam that we did to our outseam. So 1/2 an inch on the top near the crotch area, and 1.5 inches at the bottom, so near the foot of the pants. Next up, we have our rise. So for both our front and our back rise, we're going to be adding 1/2 an inch on both sides, so that'll increase by 1 inch. For both our thigh and our hip measurements, we're going to be adding 1/2 an inch to both the left and the right side, so that'll be 1 inch in total. All right, so we have our diagram and our measurements. Now let's translate this to a pattern. We'll be starting off with the front two panels. What you'll need are some markers or pens, some sort of writing utensil, a meter stick, some sort of right angle ruler, and a tape measure. So if you don't have a meter stick or a yardstick, most people don't, you can just use a regular 12-inch ruler, although it might be a little bit more difficult to get those long, straight portions. You'll also need some pattern paper. Unfortunately, I don't have any pattern paper, which is fine. I'll just be doing all my measurements on the fabric. Just make sure when you do the measurements on the fabric, you're not using any pens or any markers. You want to use some fabric safe, writing utensils, so either like tailor's chalk or like a fabric safe marker or pen. First thing you want to do is lay the fabric down on a flat surface. So if you got a big table, that's cool, or in this case, I'm using the floor. We also want to make sure the grain of the fabric is straight. The grain just refers to how the fabric was woven together, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines, just to make sure everything is lined up straight. Also, we're going to make sure the fabric is doubled up, so the wrong sides of the fabric should be facing each other, whereas the right side should be facing out. All right, we're going to start from the leg opening and drawing a right angle in the corner of the fabric. I start from the corner of the fabric because it's going to be using the least amount of material. And from here, we're going to draw out the full length of the out seam, as well as the leg opening. Since these are straight pants, we're going to make sure that a portion of the inseam is straight as well too. So just grab your 12-inch ruler and draw about 12 inches or so of the inseam from the leg opening. From the top of the out seam, I'll be drawing another straight line portion, and from here I can draw the waist. So we're going to take our waist measurement and draw it at a downward angle. So downward as in facing the rise of the pants, and this is going to be 1/2 an inch from the line that we just drew. This will make the front of our pants angle slightly downwards towards the hem of our pants. Next up, we'll draw the rise of the pants. As I said before, it's a pretty important, part of the pants to draw. So if you're not super comfortable drawing it freehand, definitely grab a pair of pants that fits pretty well. We can just take the rise from there. The rise shape should be generally a J-shaped curve. That looks kind of something like this. Now, when drawing the rise, you want about half of the rise to be straight, a straight portion, and then after that, we can start the curve. And here I'm just taking my tape measure, going over the line that I just drew and making sure that the length of the rise is correct. All right, now that we have the rise drawn, we can focus on drawing the inseam. Starting at the bottom of the rise, we'll be drawing a curve that connects the bottom of the rise to that 12-inch portion that we drew of the inseam before. So that should be one large curve that connects the bottom of the rise to the leg opening of the pants. And again, grab your tape measure, go over the inseam that we just drew to make sure that everything is correct. Again, I do want to bring up that there are curved rulers that make this process a lot easier. I got two of them here. These are rulers that you might see, variform curved rulers. So you can use them for different types of curves. I usually use a bigger one like this for a hip curve and something like this for like, you know, the rise of the pants or even like an armhole. But I was just assuming that you guys don't have this, so we're just gonna be doing everything freehand. For our last two measurements, our hip measurement and our thigh measurement, we're going to be starting from the rise and measuring towards the outseam. You might overshoot the outseam since it is a straight line, but if that happens, it's okay, don't worry about it. Just adjust the outseam accordingly to match up with the lines that we drew. Since the outseam was a straight line and we pushed it out slightly, this will make a curve in the outseam, which is exactly what we want because your hips have a curve on them and the outseam should have a curve to reflect that as well. Now we have all of our measurements, all of our lines drawn. It's really important to go over with everything that we drew, all of our measurements, with our tape measure just to make sure that everything is accurate, and you can add little tiny adjustments where needed. All right, so all adjustments are made, all the measurements are good. Now we can start cutting. When cutting out the fabric, really make sure to go over everything slowly and make sure you're hitting all the lines so that you cut out everything accurately. If we did this on paper, our next step would be to take the paper pattern, lay it on the fabric, and then cut that out. But since we didn't do it on paper, we completely skipped that step. All right, so we have the front panels cut out. Now let's cut out the back panels. All right, so this is pretty similar to cutting out the front, but since we do have the front panels already cut out, it makes this process a lot easier. Take the front panels, lay them onto the fabric, and then from here, this is a good starting point to make our measurements from the back panels. As we said previously, the back panels are a lot larger than the front, so taking the measurements from the front, we can make little adjustments to make the lengths for our back panels. So here I'm adjusting the rise, the inseam, the outseam, waist, all that kind of stuff. One thing I do want to touch on is the measurement for the waist. Since the rise of the back panel is a little bit larger, the rise is going to be a little bit of a different shape. So taking it from our front panel, what we want to do is make sure that the waist for the back is angled slightly upwards. So the front, we made angle slightly downwards, whereas the back, we're gonna angle it slightly upwards. This is because the back side of your body is generally a little bit larger, so you gotta compensate for that by making the angle slightly upwards. All right, so we have the back panels drawn out with our chalk. Now we can cut them out. So here, just to show you guys again, the waist for the back panels are angled slightly upwards and a little bit higher than the waist for the front panels. All right, they're cut out, they're looking good. And again, you can see how much bigger the back panels are from the front panels. This is all the cutting we'll be doing for now, so we can put the scissors away for the time being. Holding up the back panel, you can see how similar it looks to the drawing we had earlier in the video. All right, so with everything done, we can move on to our first fitting. This is something totally optional, but I definitely do recommend to do it because you can really see how the pants fits before we move on to any more complex steps. So if you have any, misfits or anything that doesn't really match up to how you want it to fit, you can figure it out now and then make those adjustments. Starting off, we're gonna be ironing all of our panels, and just one thing, like ironing and sewing, like hand in hand. So we're gonna be doing a lot of ironing in this project. Starting off with our two back panels, we line them up with the right sides facing each other, and we're gonna sew along the rise of the pants at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The front panels, we're gonna do the same thing, put the right sides together, and we're gonna sew up starting from the inseam all the way up the rise, except we're only gonna sew about 1/3 of the way. Since this is just a test fit that we're doing, we can set the stitch length on our machine to the longest stitch length that we have. This will make it go a lot faster when we're sewing because the stitches are going to be longer, and also will make it a lot easier to take apart when we're done with the fitting. So this is what it looks like when the rides of the front panel and the back panel are stitched together. And even with that long stitch length, you can see the pants are still pretty strong. Now we're gonna sew up the inseam of the pants, making sure to bring the 2 front panels and the 2 back panels together at the crotch seam, making sure that they're both lined up. Now we can sew this inseam together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next up, we got the out seam, and aligning them with the right sides facing each other. We can add pins just to secure everything so it's easier to sew, and we're gonna stitch it again at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. With that done, we'll flip the pants inside out and we can give them a try. It definitely helps to take a safety pin and pin the 2 front panels together at the opening so that you can get a little bit more free range of movement. And now that we're trying them on, walk around with them a little bit, take a seat, you really want to make sure that the pants fit well and they're comfortable before we move on to the next steps. All right, so you've tried the pants on, you realize, hey, they fit pretty good. Now we can move on to the next step, which is breaking the pants apart and going on to make the front pockets. After ironing our front panels again, we can take an additional piece of fabric, and this will be used to figure out the depth that we want our pocket to be. As you can see here, I'm laying the front panel on top of that additional piece of fabric. Now this fabric can either be the same fabric as our pants, or it can be something completely different. It's gonna be on the inside of the pants, you're not gonna see it at all, so you can really go crazy with this design. I'm just using some brown scrap fabric I had lying around. Now I'll just lay that front panel on top of the fabric, and we'll be marking out the top and the side of the front panel. Then we can cut it out. With that cutout, we're going to be cutting out 4 in total. Now taking a look at this piece that we cut out, I'm going to call it a pocket bag because it's the bag for our front pocket, so a pocket bag. You can see that there is a curved side and there's also a straight side. The curved side is going to match up with the out seam of our pants, whereas the straight side is going to match up with the interior of the pants, so it's going to be facing kind of close to the rise. On the curved edge, we'll be drawing a line that's about halfway of the length of the curve and 3/4 in, and then we'll be drawing a straight line that connects the bottom of the pocket bag all the way up to that 3/4 of an inch line we drew. So it might seem a little bit confusing now, but it'll all come together in the end. At the bottom of that pocket bag, we'll also add a curve, and then we'll cut the entire thing out. It should look something like this. All right, with everything cut out, I'll be placing our pocket bag onto the front panel of our pocket. I'm using my ruler to determine the width and the depth of the pocket opening. For the shape of the pocket opening, I'll be making it a curve, but you can pretty much make it whatever you want. I made it a curve because that's something I kind of like, and also mirrors the shape of these Levi's 550s pants. So it's a little bit more of a casual shape. You can see it's kind of like a curve. And that's what I'll be doing. All right, so you figured out the shape that you want. It can be a curve, a straight diagonal line, or like wavy or something like that, go crazy. We're going to be layering both the front panels together with the wrong sides facing each other, as well as 2 of the pocket bags on top. Then we'll be drawing out that pocket opening with some chalk and then cutting out on that chalk line everything at once. So again, we're cutting out 4 pieces, 2 pocket bags and 2 of the front panels. And with that done, we'll be pinning up the pocket bags to the front panels of the pants and then taking it to our sewing machine to add a 1/2 inch stitch. The pocket opening I have is a curve, and when you're stitching curves together, it's always good to make sure you go nice and slowly so that everything lines up perfectly. With that stitch sewn, of course, we got to go over it with the iron, and now we're adding an understitch. How to add the understitch is we iron the pocket bag upwards so that it lays on top of the seam allowance that we made, and then we're going to be adding a stitch that stitches the pocket bag to the seam allowance. You can add a single stitch, but I'm adding a double stitch because I think it looks nice. Again, you're not going to be able to see this. It's going to be on the inside of the pants, so you won't be able to see it. And again, when we're stitching the pocket bag, you want to make sure that you catch the seam allowance in that stitch. With all that done, I grab my iron the pants again, and this is what the front of the pants is kind of going to look like. All right, so let's finish up the pocket. With the other pocket bag, we can now make the back of the pocket. Laying the front panel on top of the pocket bag, you can kind of see how it all comes together. Because these are different fabric for the pocket bag, I do have to add an additional piece of fabric on top of it to make sure that it matches the front panel of the pants. And of course, if you use the same fabric, this would not apply to you. All right, so this is a piece of fabric I made. I went a little bit fancy with all the curves. You do not have to do that. As long as the piece of fabric you add comes down to the notch that we made previously, that's pretty much all you need. Again, no one's gonna see these fancy curves and stuff I'm adding. I just added because I like it. You know, personality stuff, I think it's cool. And with laying the front panel on top of the pocket bag again, you can see how everything kind of comes together. Let's go to the machine and stitch the piece of fabric to the pocket bag, and of course, overlock all the ends. If you guys don't have an overlock machine, that's totally fine. A zigzag stitch works pretty much the same. With all that done, I now place the two pocket bags together like this and add a couple of pins to secure everything in place. And after a quick iron, I can secure all the edges I pinned. All right, so this is what the pocket bag looks like with everything stitched up. Again, I used a 1/2 inch seam allowance like I do on everything. And I overlock the edges as well. Last thing I have to do is stitch up the front and the side of the pockets to make sure it's secure. And then we're done. Now we can move on to the front zipper of the pants. All right, so for the front zipper, the first thing we need is, of course, a zipper. Now, this zipper can either be plastic or metal, and it really depends on the weight of your fabric. You can honestly do whatever you want. You can choose one you want, but I recommend using metal zippers for heavier garments, so like denim or like you got like a thick canvas, and using plastic zippers for, you know, lighter fabrics like cotton or I don't know, linen, if you want to make linen pants or something like that, or like wool or something. Using a ruler, we can measure out the length of the zipper. The length of the zipper I have is 6 inches. And of course, the length really depends on how long your rise is gonna be. A longer rise, you know, warrants a longer zipper, and vice versa. Shorter rise, shorter zipper. Now we have the measurements of the zipper. Now let's get the measurements of our zipper tape, which is just a piece of fabric that secures our zipper together. You can see here, the zipper is metal, the zipper tape is blue. The measurements for my zipper tape are 7.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And we'll be using these measurements to determine the first piece of our zipper flap. Using a scrap piece of fabric, this can be, again, the same fabric as our, you know, pants, or it can be a different type of fabric. It's on the inside, you're not gonna see it. We're gonna be making a zipper flap that's a little bit larger than the zipper tape that we measured. So in this case, my zipper tape was 1.5 inches by 7.5 inches. And I'm gonna be making the flap, I think I used 9 inches by 2 inches. And with that cut out, we can add a little curve at the end of the zipper flap. With the flap cut out, I just overlocked the curved edge to prevent it from fraying. Of course, I have to iron it, and now I can attach it to the front panel. When attaching it, you want to make sure you attach it to the left front panel, not the right one, the left one, and attach them with the right sides facing each other and add some pins just to secure it. Then you can stitch along the edge with a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Since the zipper flap is a little bit longer than the zipper tape we have, to determine where exactly along the rise to place it, what you want to do is put your zipper onto the rise of the pants. So put the top of the zipper at the top of the rise, and then where the zipper lands at the bottom, we're just going to mark it with some chalk, and that's where you're going to put the end, the curved end of the zipper flap. Boom, that's done. Now we can understitch the zipper flap. And we do this by adding a stitch that sews the rise to the zipper flap, kind of like this. Fold the flap over, iron it down, and now we can attach the zipper. Make sure the edge of the zipper tape lines up with the edge of the rise, and then we'll be adding a double stitch on the other side of the zipper tape. Make sure to just sew the zipper tape to the flap and not to the front panel. With all that done, it should look something like this. With that done, we'll be sewing a curve that attaches the zipper flap to the front panel. It definitely helps to take some chalk and draw a curved line, and then we'll just be stitching along this line. Back from the sewing machine, you can see that the stitch attached the zipper flap to the front panel, and your underside should look something like this. All right, next up, we'll be adding the zipper guard to the pants. It's essentially the same exact shape as the zipper flap that we did before, but this time we'll be cutting out 2 pieces of fabric. And again, these can be either the same fabric as our front panels or a totally different fabric. Go crazy. After cutting it out and stitching along the curved ends, I'll be sewing the two pieces together and then I can flip it inside out. Once that's done, I can iron it flat and then add some top stitching. We'll just set this aside for now and move on to the right side of the pants. With the right side of our pants, we'll be folding the rise in by 1/2 inch, ironing it flat, and again overlocking the edges so that nothing frays. Before moving on, I just want to do a little test fit so we can all see how the pants are going to come together. All right, so that's good. Now let's move back to the zipper guard. Taking the zipper guard that we just made, we're going to line it to the edge of the zipper tape and running a stitch along there just to secure those two together. And of course, I got to overlock the ends to make sure that nothing frays. Once that's done, we can align the right front panel to the zipper tape like this. Add some pins, really make sure everything is pinned together so that nothing moves or shifts while you're sewing. At the bottom of the zipper, as you can see here, use some chalk to mark out where the bottom of that metal zipper stopper is. And in that area, we'll be cutting out a small notch on the 1/2 inch portion that we just folded, and then we're gonna be flipping it out. Open up that fold, and then we're just gonna pin it in place. With everything pinned in place, let's take it to the sewing machine, and I like to use a zipper foot so we can get a really nice edge stitch along the places that I pinned. With that done, this is what the stitch looks like, and here you can see that notch that I pinned down. Everything is nice and secure. I also added a double stitch just for some extra reinforcement, but you guys don't have to do that. All right, so let's finish up the front part of the pants. First thing I do is I align the bottom of the rise together, and I also align the top of the rise. Then I add pins to pin the left and the right pant panel together. With everything pinned together, I run a stitch that starts from the bottom of the rise, goes all the way up to the bottom of the zipper, that metal zipper guard, go across, and I go all the way back down. With that stitch done, you can really see how the front's coming together. And when I compare it to my Levi's 550s, you can see that they're virtually identical. One last thing we have to do though is add one small stitch. Here on these Levi's 550s, you can see that this small stitch secures the zipper guard to the front left panel. And when I open up the pants, you see that that stitch prevents you from opening the pants all the way. Whereas on our pants, without that stitch, you can open it all the way up, which isn't something that we want. Using some chalk, we can mark out that stitch where we want it and then sew everything together. All right, with that done, we are finished with the front, and this was by far the hardest part of the pants. So if you made it through here, good job, you did it. Take a nice break, and when we come back, we're gonna be sewing up the back of the pants. Starting off like we always do with the ironing the back panels to make sure everything is nice and flat. With that done, make sure the back panels are facing each other with the right sides together, and then we're gonna stitch along that rise at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After that stitch, and of course overlocking the ends, we're just going to be stitching down that seam allowance to either the left or the right side. To determine which side that's going to be, we're just going to see which side it is on our front panel so that the two match. So here in the front, you can see that it's facing the left, so we're just going to make sure that on the back panels, it's also facing the left. Grab your iron it down, and then we can just stitch it down. Next up, we'll be adding some back pockets. And again, this is totally optional. I know lots of pants that don't even have back pockets, so if you don't want back pockets on this pants, totally skip this part. Grabbing the back of our pants, we'll just place it on our body so we can figure out exactly where the pocket can sit. Now we'll just place our hand on the back of the pants so we can kind of figure out a good place for the height of the pocket to be. Here you can see my hand lies about 3 or so inches, probably a little bit more actually, from the waist of the pants. So this is where I'm going to make the pocket. Again, this totally depends on you, the style you want for the pants, where your hand lies, so you can make them as high or as low as you want. Using my tailor's chalk, I'll just draw a rough chalk line to where I want the pocket to go. The width of the pocket is about 6 inches, so I think that's a pretty good size for, you know, my hand and the stuff I want to put in the pockets, you know, wallets, phone, that kind of stuff. And of course, you can make it as large or as small as you want. For the length of the pocket, I want it to be a little bit larger than the width of the pocket, so relatively a square shape. But again, your pants, your rules, make it as long or as short as you want. So using some more of that scrap fabric, we can cut out a pocket, and I'll be adding some seam allowance to it, so 1/2 inch to each side except for the top of the pocket, which will be 1 inch. So again, 1/2 inch of seam allowance on 3 sides and 1 inch on the top. Now I'm just using my seam gauge to make sure that the seam allowance is correct. If you guys don't have a seam gauge, don't worry about it, a ruler will suffice. So this pocket here, you can see it's about the size of my phone, which is a pretty good size for me actually. Next, we can pin up the pocket, iron it of course, before we add a stitch along 3 of the sides. This is also totally optional, but I'm adding a flap at the top of the pocket. The flap I'm adding kind of mimics the flap on these Arc'teryx pants. I really like the way that it looks, so it's the kind of flap I'm gonna add. You can see it's stitched down on 2 sides, but you can still use it to access the pocket. This is what the finished product looks like, and again, totally optional. I know a whole bunch of pants that don't even have back pockets. With that done, let's move on to putting all the pieces together. Excuse the outfit change, I just came back from somewhere. Let's get back to sewing. Starting off with the right sides facing each other, we'll be attaching the front 2 panels and the back 2 panels together at the inseam. Now this part is really important. It's a lot similar to what we did in the very beginning of the video when we're doing the test fit. So we're gonna make sure that the stitching and the seams line up on the inseam. This is important because we wanna make sure it's even on both sides. During this part, I really recommend adding pins because it helps keep the fabric from shifting and moving a lot when you're sewing. And now we can take it to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After stitching everything and of course overlocking the seams, next up we're going to grab our iron and we're just going to press the seam allowance to the back of the pants and stitch it down. This is pretty similar to what we did when sewing the back 2 panels together. Next up we're going to be sewing the outseam. This is pretty similar to what we did again during the test fitting and what we did for the inseam. We're going to be sewing them with the right sides facing each other. You can use some pins if you need some help to align the pieces. Take to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. With everything stitched and overlocked, it's now time to stitch down the pockets. Again, pretty similar to what we did with the inseam. We're going to be pressing the seam allowance of the outseam towards the back, and then we're just going to sew from the top of the waist along the outseam till about 1 inch past the pocket opening. And that's it. The pants are stitched together. You can really see it coming together now. Next up, we have to attach the waistband. First thing we got to do is make sure that the waistband is even. So if you have any high points or any frayed edges, grab your scissors and just trim around that to make sure everything's nice and even. Here you can see I left a little bit of extra space for the zipper guard and the zipper flap. So I'm grabbing my scissors and I'm just trimming that down to match the height of the rest of the waistband. All right, let's find out the circumference of our waist. To do this, pretty simple. Grab your tape measure and measure from one edge of the waist all the way around the circumference to the other edge, adding on the zipper flap as well too. Now, since we stitched everything together and added that zipper flap, that zipper guard, it is going to be larger than the measurement that we already got before, but that's okay. Now, when we have this measurement, we're going to be adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance to the length on both sides, so that comes up to 1 inch of additional length. So whatever measurement you get for the waist, plus the zipper guard, you're going to be adding 1 inch extra. Now it's time to cut out the waistband. So we have the length of our waistband. Now let's determine the width of the waistband. And the term width in this case I'm using as the height, the distance from the pants to the top of the waistband. So the width. Length is the circumference and the width is like the height of the waistband. When it comes to the width of the waistband, again, it really depends, but usually you want to make it 1.5 inches wide. Again, using my trusty Levi's 550s in the example and my ruler. Here you can see that the width of the waistband is you're gonna focus, I don't know, it's 1.5 inches wide. And this is a pretty standard width for most waistbands that you'll see. If you get like dress pants or like jeans or chinos, it's gonna be about 1.5 inches. You can, of course, make it wider if you want. It's your prerogative. Your pants, do whatever you want, but I do recommend making it like 1.5 or even like 2 inches wide. Taking a look again at our Levi's 550s, so we have the width as 1.5, but here you can see that it's with that little crease there. Maybe you can see that. It's folded over, so it's doubled. So that means we have to double the width that we have. So with our 1.5 inch width, double it, times it by 2, that gives us 3 inches. And of course, as we always do, we have to add seam allowance for both the top and the bottom of the width, which is 1/2 inch, which is an extra inch of width. So we started off with 1.5 inches and we doubled it to get 3, and we added 1/2 inch of seam allowance to the top and the bottom, which is 1 inch. That gives us 4 inches. So the waist that we have now is 4 inches, a piece of fabric. I always like to have a little bit more wiggle room, so I'm going to add an additional inch to mine. So mine's going to be 5 inches by whatever the circumference of my waist is. All right, so we got the measurement down. Let's grab a scrap piece of fabric. With that scrap piece of fabric, grab our scissors and cut out the waistband. Next step is another optional step, and this is going to be adding something called interfacing to our waistband. For those of you, why do I still have this? For those of you who don't know, interfacing is a material that's used to add stiffness or rigidity to some fabric. It comes in a whole bunch of different types: fusible interfacing, non-fusible interfacing. It has different weights as well too, if you want something a little bit more rigid or something a little less rigid. You do see it mostly in, dress shirt collars, something like this, and dress shirt cuffs. That's why the collars and cuffs are a lot stiffer than the rest of the shirt. But of course, you can put it in a lot of different things, like pants, waistbands, for example. It just gives it a little bit more stiffness. So the type I have here is called fusible interfacing, and it's a medium weight. And what fusible means in this case is that it fuses itself to the fabric, so it becomes one. Taking a look at the interfacing, you can see that it has 2 sides. One side is smooth and the other side is rough. And a closer look at the rough side of the interfacing, you can see it has all these little dots on them. Those dots are fabric glue or fabric adhesive, and what it does is it's heat activated. So when you add heat to it, the dots and the glue melts and it fuses the fabric and the interfacing together. Again, it really depends on what type of interfacing you have. It's always good to look at. They usually come with little pamphlets or sheets or whatever that show you how to use it. In this case, I can just run my iron over the interfacing and it'll stick. Some other interfacings I know you need like to put a damp cloth and high heat and steam it over, but it really depends on the type, so it's always good to take a look at that. All right, with that tangent out of the way, we'll be cutting a strip of interfacing that is 1.5 inches wide and the entire length of our waistband. Grabbing my iron and just fusing that interfacing to the wrong side of the waistband, I want to make sure that I attach it 1/2 inch up from the width so that it sits a little bit higher than the bottom of our waistband. All right, after that's done, it's time to attach the waistband to the pants. Starting from the side that's closest to the interfacing, we're going to be pinning it all the way around the circumference of the waist. Now, you don't want to start from the edge of the waistband. You do want to start 1/2 inch back, because remember, we did add that 1/2 inch seam allowance on the length. After it's pinned, we do want to stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and this is what it looks like when it's finished. I'm just going to press it on the right side to make sure everything looks nice and smooth. Next up, we can fold in the edges of the waistband, and it kind of looks like this when you fold it in by that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we fold the waistband over towards the interior of the pants, and then we want to make sure that it is 1.5 inch of width. Grabbing our pins, we pin up all the way around the circumference of the pants. After we finish folding the waistband and pinning it all together, next up is to fold up that last edge just to tuck it in underneath the waistband. All right, we folded in the edges, we pinned it together. Now it's time to stitch. So we're going to be stitching all 4 sides of the waistband, starting by stitching up the top of the waistband all the way around the circumference, going down one of the sides, and then stitching back all the way around the circumference and going up the last side. When we're stitching the top and the sides, we can stitch at about a 1/4 inch of seam allowance from the edge, but when we're stitching the side of the waistband that attaches to the pants, we just want to stitch in between that groove that it makes so we can catch everything on the underside. Back from the sewing machine, this is what the waistband looks like, and as you can see, I stitched all 4 sides of the waistbands, the 2 long sides and the 2 short sides. When that's done, take your iron, press over the entire thing, and now we can move on to our belt loops. Making belt loops is probably the simplest part of this tutorial, but it still takes some consideration when making it. First, I'm going to show you how to make one singular belt loop, and then I'm going to show you how to make a bunch of them a lot quicker. We'll be making belt loops that are 3/4 of an inch wide by 3 inches long, and this is a pretty standard size for belt loops. On my sample pair of pants, my Levi's 550s, these belt loops are actually 1/2 inch wide by 3 inches in length. I think 1/2 inch is a little too small in my opinion. You can make them 1/2 inch if you want, but I think 3/4 of an inch is a little bit better. All right, making our singular belt loop, we're gonna be cutting out a scrap of fabric that is 3 inches by 2 inches. With that cut out, we'll be folding the rectangle that we made in half along the 2-inch line, and we'll end up with a rectangle, a smaller rectangle, that is 1 inch by 3 inches. When that's done, we'll fold in the sides by 1/4 of an inch and iron everything flat. This will get us our final size of 3/4 of an inch by 3 inches. Now lastly, we'll be adding 2 parallel edge stitches on both sides of the belt loop just to make sure everything is nice and secure. And that's it, that's your belt loop. Now this isn't the only way to make a belt loop. As I said before, I'm going to show you how to make multiple at the same time. I didn't have a piece of fabric that was long enough, so I'm going to show you how to make it on paper. Again, same process, just on paper. Just use your imagination, pretend it's fabric. Normally a pair of pants will have 5 belt loops, like on a pair of jeans or a pair of chinos. So I'll just show you guys how to make 5 belt loops, and if you want to make more, you can just extrapolate that, you know, dimensions. Each belt loop that we're making is 3 inches in length, and the width is 2 inches. So if we're making 5 of them, 5 times 3 is 15, so we're going to be making a rectangle that is 15 inches long by 2 inches wide. And after that, we can repeat the same steps, fold the rectangle in half until we get a rectangle that is 1 inch wide by 15 inches long, then tuck in the sides by 1/4 of an inch. One more time, we get another rectangle that's 3/4 of an inch by 15 inches long. And lastly, the same step, we run 2 parallel edge stitches on the sides of the belt loops, iron it nice and flat, and then when that's done, we can cut up the belt loop into 3-inch sections, and we'll end up with 5 belt loops that are 3 inches by 3/4 of an inch. 3 inches by 3/4 of an inch. Again, you can make your pants have as many belt loops as you want. This is your pair of pants, you can do whatever you want. I don't recommend going any lower than 5 belt loops. Anything less than that, kind of getting a little risky, I'm not gonna lie, but this pants that I'm making, I have 7 belt loops. I think that's a good amount of belt loops for me. All right, we have our belt loops. Now let's get to attaching them to the pants. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna be folding up the top and the bottom of the belt loop by 1/4 of an inch. So initially the size was 3 inches, and since we're folding 1/4 on the top and 1/4 at the bottom, the entire size comes down to 2.5 inches, which actually is the same size as the belt loops on these pair of Levi's 550s. 2.5 inches. Nice. Now, in terms of belt loop placement, again, you can put them pretty much wherever you want on the pants, but I recommend putting, if you have 5 belt loops, 3 in the back and 2 in the front. I have 7, so I'm putting 3 in the back, 2 on the side seams, and 2 in the front. But generally, you want to make sure that they're kind of evenly spaced out throughout the pants. Now, when it comes to attaching the actual belt loop to the pants, it is a lot of fabric. It's pretty thick material. We're taking the belt loop, which is a couple of pieces folded together, folding it in half, plus the double waistband and the interfacing. It's a lot of fabric to get through, and it might put a little bit of stress on your machine. So how I recommend to go through it is start from the middle of the belt loop. So put your needle into the belt loop in the middle of the fabric, and using your hand wheel, rotate it towards you to insert the needle in the fabric, and then you can kind of move it by hand. If the presser foot on your machine is kind of groaning and kind of giving you a little bit of trouble, try moving it by hand a little bit slowly to help your machine stitch the entire belt loop. Once you have that done, stitch it from the top and the bottom, and repeat that process for all 5 or 7 or how many belt loops you want to add to the pants. All right, with that done, let's move on to our buttonholes. Buttonholes are also pretty straightforward. The machine pretty much does all the work here. But again, there are a couple of things that I do want to go over. First up is buttonhole placement. The buttonhole is going to be on the left side of your pants. So the same side that we started off with, the left side of your pants, not the right, the left side of the pants. And in terms of placement on the waistband, you want to make sure that it's centered in the width of the waistband and it's set back by about 1/2 inch from the edge. Again, using my trusty sample pair of my Levi's 550s, here you can see the waistband. The buttonhole is right in the middle of the waistband, and if we use a ruler, it is about, yep, 1/2 inch from the edge. Can you guys even see that? Let me see. It might be a little blurry, but just take my word for it. It's 1/2 inch from the edge of the waistband. All right, now we have, why do I have this? All right, now we have our buttonhole placement. Let's get our size of our button down. What I recommend for button size for pants is something that has a circumference of 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch. Anything smaller than that is kind of not really suitable for pants waistbands, just a little bit too small. Anything bigger than that, you're gonna get really cumbersome. It's gonna be kind of hard to fit through the buttonhole. So 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch is a good size. With that size I also recommend round buttons. You can use square buttons too, or any other shape of buttons, but again, round buttons are probably the easiest. And also you want buttons that are relatively thin. Nothing too chunky to try and squeeze through that buttonhole, something that's relatively thin. All right, once we have that button size down, let's measure it with our ruler, or in my case, a seam gauge. The buttons I'm using are metal buttons. Again, you guys don't have to do this. You can use regular plastic or wooden buttons. So to find out the size of the buttonhole that we're going to make, we have to figure out the size of our button. Again, this button is 3/4 of an inch in circumference, and whatever size of button you have, you want to make your buttonhole about 1/4 of an inch larger than that. So in this case, the button is 3/4 of an inch in circumference, so the length of the buttonhole is going to be 1 inch long. All right, we have our size of the buttonhole, we have our button. Let's take it to the machine and actually start making this buttonhole. Every machine should have a buttonhole foot. If you guys don't know what that is, it looks like this. It's like a plastic slidey kind of foot, and we attach it to the sewing machine. How to actually sew the buttonhole when we have the buttonhole foot in, it really does help to look at the manual of your machine, or if you go online, you might be able to see if they have buttonhole videos for your specific type. The type of machine I have is a Singer heavy duty, and how you sew buttonholes on that, it's pretty simple. You have this little dial, 1, 2, 3, 4, it shows the steps, and you pretty much run through the steps and it makes the buttonhole for you. Starting with the buttonhole foot all the way at the front, place it down at the top of the buttonhole. Then we pretty much go through the steps. Step 1 makes a horizontal bar. Step 2 makes a really thin vertical bar all the way up the length of the buttonhole. Step 3, which is the same as step 1, makes another horizontal bar, and step 4 brings it all the way back to where we started with another vertical line. And that's it, our buttonhole is made. Now that we have our buttonhole made, it's time to actually open up the buttonhole, and you can use this with a, seam ripper, or in my case, I'm using an X-Acto knife. My seam ripper was kind of dull. Just put the X-Acto knife or seam ripper into the space where those two parallel lines are and pretty much cut open the buttonhole. We want to make sure you go slowly when you do this. You don't want to cut yourself, or worse, cut the pants. When we have that done, the buttonhole is open. We can lay the left and the right sides of the pants together. I'm using this tool called an awl. If you guys don't have this, it's essentially just pretty much a sharp point. It kind of looks like an ice pick, but it's used for like art and sewing stuff. I'm using my awl to poke through the edge of the buttonhole that we just opened up all the way through the right side of the fabric. This is going to give me a mark to sort of show where the button's supposed to be. On the right side of the fabric, I can see that little hole that I made. Again, if you guys don't have an awl, you can either use some chalk to mark it or your seam ripper to poke a hole. Now we can attach the button using that little hole that we made, or a little prick, as a guide where the center of the button should go. If you guys have regular buttons to be sewn on with a needle and thread, that's pretty self-explanatory. Stitch the button onto the pants. In this case, I have a metal button, so it's a little bit differently. It comes in 2 parts. One part is the bottom, one part is the top. So I put the bottom, which kind of looks like a nail, through the right side of the pants and attach the top part onto that metal bottom. I use some pliers just to press the two together. Since it's metal, the pliers might scratch the button, so I'm just adding a piece of fabric on top of the pliers as to not scratch up anything. All right, so we got the button sewn on, the button attached. Now we can give the pants, a little try on just to make sure that everything fits well and the button's in the right place. With the buttonhole finished, we just have one more step, and that's adding the hem to the pants. All right, so adding the hem, again, this is another, non-mandatory step, totally optional. I know a lot of pants that don't even have hems, they're just raw at the bottom. And if you like that look, honestly, you can just skip the step and the pants can be done here. But if you want to have your pants hemmed, just stick around for a little bit longer and I'll show you guys how to do that. All right, to hem the pants, the first thing you gotta do is, of course, try them on. Ignore my socks here. Preferably, you wanna try them on with shoes, and you wanna see how they fit and sit exactly on the shoe so you can determine what hem you want from there. Now the hem is just how the bottom of the pants are finished. If you want them extra baggy, you can make them longer. If you want them, cropped, if you kind of like that look, you can make them a little bit higher. But when you determine the right length of pants for you, you can just cuff them and add some pins to really secure everything together. Now when making the hem, you can make it as large or as small as you want. Usually dress pants and stuff like that have larger hems, like 2 inches, 3 inches, and that's so that, if you take them to a tailor's, they can hem the pants, make it longer or shorter as you need. Generally, like more casual pants like chinos and jeans have like a shorter hem, usually 1/2 inch. These pants, these Levi's 550s, I wonder how many times I said Levi's 550s in this video. These ones have a raw hem, so I just kind of opened up the hem. You can kind of see that faded white area. That was the hem that the pants previously had, and the hem was, if I fold it back and fold it in, it was 1/2 inch. So we're gonna be making the hem of this pants 1/2 inch and folding it in twice. Since we're folding it in twice, 1/2 inch times 2 is 1 inch. So whatever length you have that you like for your pants, you're gonna be adding 1 inch extra to that length, and everything else you can just take your scissors and cut off and discard. Once we have that length down, you're gonna be folding the pants in by 1/2 inch once, pinning everything, folding it in again twice, pinning everything. So that's 2 folds, 1/2 inch each. When that's done, again, take it to the sewing machine and stitch all the way around the circumference of the leg opening. Now this is one way to do it. It does make the hem of the pants a little bulky. I kind of like that look. It's a little bit more, bulky, a little bit more rigid in my opinion. Also, you do see hems of pants that have a turn in by 1/4 inch first and then 1/2 inch. Or sometimes you see pants with a 1/2 inch turn and then 3/4 inch. This gives a little bit of space in between the bottom of the pants so it's not as bulky. In my opinion, don't really have to do that. Well, you can if you want to, but you don't really have to do that. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. Either you fold in by 1/2 twice, fold in by 1/4, then you fold in by 3/4, or then a 1/4 first, then 1/2 inch. Doesn't really matter too much. As long as you fold the hem in twice, it's beautiful. So again, we took it to the sewing machine and we stitched along the edge to secure the hem together. And with that done, of course, you have to do it to both legs. Don't forget that. And with that done, we have the pants and they are finished. We're finished with the pants. This is what they look like. Ignore the wrinkled state. I did wear them a couple of times around. That's why they're so kind of wrinkled looking. But yeah, they look pretty good. I like them. This is kind of like a close-up of what they look like. You can see 3 belt loops on the back and 4 belt loops on the front. So that's gonna be 7 belt loops. I did add that 7 belt loops onto the pants. One other thing is what the back pocket looks like. You can see that flap there. I did get that design for the Arc'teryx pants. I really like how these pants turned out. That's what the front looks like. Boom. And the zipper. Nice metal zipper. These are really good pants. They fit me very, very well actually. Let me know what you guys think of the tutorial. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I kind of went over for the sake of simplicity. I didn't even talk about like rulers that you want to use for the pants. I just kind of assumed that nobody had these. These are like the Variform curve rulers, but there's a whole bunch of other different types of rulers that just make the pants process a lot more straightforward and a lot easier. I think learning how to do stuff like freehand will definitely give you a better understanding about how things are created, how things are made. So then once you figure that out, you can kind of go off book and make whatever you want when it comes to like flares or like baggy pants or like super tight tapered pants. We didn't even talk about like pleats or anything like that. Oh man, we didn't even talk about darts. Usually on like dress pants, you have darts on the back of the pants. I just really want to simplify everything. I might make like other videos in the future going into depth, but more of that stuff. But even like measurements, like when it comes to measurements, I think I had like seven or so measurements, but there's a whole bunch of other measurements you can do for pants to get a really nice like tailored fit. If you want some dope flares, you need a measurement from like your knee to the floor, different thigh measurements as well too. like if you want like a high-waisted pants, you can have like a lower measurement for the waist and the upper measurement for the waist. You can get into different types of fabrics, different types of like grain patterns. I cut along the grain, but if you want something that's cut like diagonal to the grain, I'll give you a different fit as well too. What else? Like multi-buttons. Some dress pants have like 2 buttons here, different types of waistbands, different types of pocket designs. I just did like the curved I'm just rambling. I'm rambling because there's like so much stuff to talk about when it comes to making pants. They seem like simple, and I don't know, whatever, it's a pair of pants, but really like you can go into so much depth when making these things. Even different style, like you can go so, man, hold on, let me chill out. If I were to do these pants again and she gets this tutorial, I'd probably make 2 things. Number one, I'd probably go really crazy with like the details. For example, one thing I love to do, I don't know why I didn't do it on this pants, is this zipper guard right here. Okay, first of all, I don't know if this is exactly called a zipper guard, but I just call it that because, I don't know, just zipper guard, man. Guards the zipper. I like to add decorative stitching onto this. I know, you're not gonna be able to see it. I'm saying who cares, but I like adding it because, you know, I know it's there. But yeah, if I were to have to do this again, I'd probably make it black, the pants black with white contrast stitching or red contrast stitching. That would look really dope. What else? Man, there's just like so much depth you can go into when it comes to making pants, but I'm really pleased with how these turned out. As I said, they fit me really well. The denim that I chose, these aren't really jeans. They're more like, well, I guess they're jeans because they're denim, but they're more like dress pants. We're like denim dress pants, so they have that fit, but they're fit pretty well. Yeah, I really like them. I don't want to keep rambling, keep you guys too much. This video is already long. Hopefully the next video I make won't have to wait 5 months for it. Yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, I don't know, right? Something in the chat. Oh yeah, right, sulfur in the chat if you made it. If you made it this far. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more consistent uploads, follow me on TikTok. I probably post like almost every week on there, a new sewing project that doesn't make a YouTube video. Follow me on Instagram, all that kind of stuff. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like it, if you didn't like it, if there's anything else you want me to explain in greater detail, I'll be happy to do that in another video. Yeah, man, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm tired. This ring light's been on for like an hour now. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.